This is Lightning Power Lunch on the Lightning Audio Network with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli.
The playoffs continue. Exciting game last night. Edmonton continues to roll a bit, and we're going to talk about the East throughout, some Lightning discussion with our audience, but we're back. Power Lunch here on Lightning Radio, the off-season edition. We're doing something once a week. My broadcast partner, Dave Mishkin, of course, on the other side. Steve Versnick's our producer. And I should say, partner, right out of the gate, I've always felt like when we do our games, I mention, before I kick it over to you guys, I say in the Hockey Hall of Famer, Phil Esposito. But now I can say, and let's bring in our Hall of Fame broadcast crew, Dave Mishkin, add him to that. I'll let you kind of take the floor on it, but we were talking about this before the show hopped on, about the honor that you had the other day being inducted into this prestigious class with John Cooper. But first off, congratulations, and tell us a little bit more about this opportunity here.
So the Sports Club of Tampa Bay is a club in Tampa Bay that helps promote sports, the youth sports. They do a lot of fundraising, and they have a Hall of Fame. And Rick Beckham is in that Hall of Fame, in addition to the Foster Hewitt Award that he won a few years back. The late Dave Wills is in the Sports Club of Tampa Bay Hall of Fame, as is Andy Freed, Gene Deckerhoff. I'm just mentioning some of the announcers. There are coaches, there are players that have had significant impacts in our area. I went to the event last year, and in last year's class, it included Steve Spurrier, who his connection to Tampa Bay was actually through the USFL. If you remember that with the Tampa Bay team. But Bruce Arians went in when he coached the Bucks to the Super Bowl with Tom Brady. Aaron Andrews went in. So our good friend JP Peterson hosts it, and I'm part of the class this year, which includes, as you mentioned, John Cooper, but also Dick Vitale, Evan Longoria, among others. Tony Dungy is getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. So that'll be next Wednesday, as in a week from today.
And it's sold out, correct? Which we should.
Yeah, I have no control over that. All I know is they gave me a seat, and they gave me some extra seats to bring in some guests. So a good friend of mine who was my first roommate out of college. We shared a house in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and we've stayed good friends ever since. He's still in Pennsylvania, not in Johnstown anymore, but he's going to come down for it, and I got my family here as well.
That's awesome.
Paul Kennedy is going to be at my table, so yeah.
What more could you want?
Yeah, look,
life is good. Life is good.
As I have said many times to people who ask, and we do have an induction speech, so I'll probably touch on this.
Yeah.
Like, to me, all of it's great, and I'm very honored and humbled to be included and with the class. I mean, some of the people I mentioned I did nothing on the field or on the ice, right, or behind the bench, but all of this to me is gravy. I mean, the biggest part of all of this for me in terms of the career that I've had is I've had the opportunity to do something I love to do, and have somebody.
How many people can say that?
Pay me to do it. Well, I think that's the lesson that I've tried to impart to my kids, who are a little older than yours, but they're starting to get to the point where I think about, like, what do I want to do? Where do I want my life to go? And at least professionally, I think that's kind of the promised land, right? If you can find something that doesn't feel like work, I mean, you're more than halfway there. So I've been very privileged, I think, to be able to do something I love to do. And all the other stuff is great, but that's like a bunch of cherries on top.
It is, and
including this.
Well, and you think about the year that you've had personally, and you won't talk about it, but I will. You mentioned this great honor, but also writing a book. You talk about the opportunities along the way. You get to do something that you love, and along the way you get to do some of these other things. But I mean, looking back on it, a lot accomplished this year. We wish the Lightning went a little further in the playoffs. We'll get into that a little bit with the Panthers and what they're doing to the Hurricanes. But I think from a personal perspective, this has been a banner year, I think, for you, because not many people write books This took you a long time to do, and you did it. And there's still more news to come on that front, where you're going to be, still signing the books and meets and greets and all of that.
We talked about the audio version.
The audio version.
I'm easily set up and ready to go. Now I just need to find a quiet room with 2 kids home from school.
Listen, you're not coming over here to do that. I can tell you that right now. You're not going to get any quiet. I can tell you that.
So this is now a logistical problem,
for sure.
not a motivation or creative problem.
But I think something for you personally, I think just you don't expect it. You're grateful when it comes, but when you can reflect back and say, look, Hall of Fame here, writing a book there, doing something that I love. I mean, it is rare today to see that, and it's obviously something that you should be very happy about, and I know we are, and very well deserved. So let me be one of the people to mention that for you.
And this is part of it too. It's funny when the Lightning got eliminated. And we were kind of like, hey, this is our last show. It didn't take long. And we were like, let's do a little something to kind of bridge the gap here.
Sure.
That was actually my wife's suggestion. She's like, you know what? You love talking hockey. Sometimes she rolls her eyes. When
do?
We're out with friends and they ask me a hockey question. She's like, oh, here we go. I mean, she's a good sport about it.
Sure.
But she said, you love doing this. It's like, you should keep the show going. So I kind of pitched to Steve the notion that, hey, maybe, it's not really as much Lightning. We've spent the last few weeks talking a lot about the other series, but we've tried to tie it back to the Lightning, particularly as the Panthers have continued to excel. And like, what does this mean for the Lightning? Like, does it change the way you view what happened to the Lightning based on how the Panthers are dismantling other top teams? But yeah, this is part of it too. Like, I've loved doing the show with you.
It's fun.
We have more shows than there are games. So, when there's a game, we have a show. But when there's no game, we also have a show. So this doesn't feel like work too. It doesn't feel like work. No,
it's 2 guys. I think when you feel good about it, it's just 2 guys talking sports. With whatever that is, and that's what we try and do during the season and in the off season. We do want to get to what's going on, obviously, in the playoffs right now. The Oilers played last night. Florida, man, I think he kind of hit the nail on the head, and maybe Julian did as well, is that did the Lightning just run into a team that just happens to be clicking on all cylinders? And unfortunate time to run into the Panthers. They still haven't written the full book yet, but they are getting towards the end, and that end looks pretty good for them in terms of how they're playing. But we'll get into that in a second. But the Lightning, Steve just reminded me, it's a good point. The Lightning did have a couple of changes.
Yeah,
to
since
their
the
staff.
last show.
Yeah, I know many of our fans upset that Jeff Blashill has taken a position. Good for him, but I felt like for whatever reason, the lightning rod. Didn't you get that? Like, we took a lot of people on X.
I don't know how much it's the squeaky wheel gets the oil. I'm not sure if this was as universal as some people. By some people, it's kind of like the noisy wheel, right?
Yeah.
Or the squeaky wheel. It's kind of like, do all Lightning fans feel this way? So what I heard in criticism of Blashill, that's what I heard, was that he was overseeing the defensive system, which prior to this year had a couple of tough years, the first 2 years. So he was the associate coach for 3 years. So after the Lightning lost to Colorado in the 2022 final, it was that offseason, the Red Wings dismissed Jeff Blashill and hired Derek Lalonde. So it was like they did a swap. So 22-23, Blashill was with the Lightning. 23-24, Blashill was with the Lightning. The Lightning didn't have great defensive numbers either of those years. This year they did. So when they were struggling, a lot of people were like, well, it's his defensive system. I'm like, I'm not sure that I first of all, I never heard that. Second of all, I'm not sure I agree with that. Like, John Cooper's the head coach. Like, they make the head coach ultimately, like, the buck stops here, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately it's the head coach's decision, whether it's John Cooper or Bruce Cassidy or Jim Montgomery. Pick a head coach. Mm-hmm. It's their show. So the assistants and the associate coaches kind of answer to them. But, Rob Zettler runs the D. Like in game, he's the one sending the D out, the defenseman. So what I do know is that Blashill and Zettler together worked on the penalty kill, which has been quite good, actually, the last couple of years. The Lightning have had a top penalty kill the last couple of years. And I don't know how much of this was, like, it's fair to say the Lightning haven't been great defensively for those 2 years. I'm not sure it was fair to say, well, it was this guy's fault. It just happened to coincide with him arriving that the defensive numbers got worse, but the Lightning's roster looked different too. They lost Ryan McDonough. By lost, I mean they moved him to Nashville after losing to Colorado. Like, that probably had as much of an effect on what the Lightning were not doing well defensively as anything else. So anyway, I've always enjoyed the interactions I had with Jeff Blashill. We do know that he was part of the kind of brain trust behind the penalty kill. The penalty kill did very, very well. He's been a head coach before. He's won as a head coach at the AHL level, at the USHL level, and it's a great opportunity for him to get back behind the bench as the main guy, which is probably what he wanted.
Yeah, and I say lightning rod. I don't want to say that X.
But
is
you're
always...
right. I mean, I heard it too, kind of
well,
often through you or other people. But...
if there was one coach that I think got the brunt of the criticism when the Lightning faltered, it was him. And I don't know if it was because of his first go-around as head coach with the Red Wings and, maybe the situation he was in there. I mean, that was a tough spot. I mean, he tried to, and they're still trying to do it.
They were in transition.
They are and you can make a case they're still in transition, maybe a little bit of a higher level. But, I think getting an opportunity with Chicago, we'll see if he has better results. And we wish him all the luck in the world. The Lightning, by all accounts, across the board, were a better defensive team, and Blashill, to a degree, had a part in that. But it's easier to, and they didn't fire him, so let's keep that in mind. He got an opportunity to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But when you let somebody go, as Julian will say, we don't want to be in the way of somebody getting an opportunity to be a head coach. That's a great honor. There's only so many of those positions there. So for Jeff Blashill, he's got to look at this and say, even if it's with Chicago, a team who's still rebuilding, has some nice pieces, but he's not going to the Vegas Golden Knights. He's not going to an established team who's ready to roll.
There is opportunity there, though.
There is opportunity
for him to really make his mark. When you take a team that is near the bottom and has been at or near the bottom for several years, and you are the guy to orchestrate the improvement, that is a great thing to have on your resume, essentially.
It is.
So, and Jeff Halpern, I've read, has also interviewed. I read he interviewed for the Boston job, as did Blashill. The Bruins have not yet made a hire, so we'll see what happens there.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I feel like Halpern, if you were going to take a poll of the assistant coaches who potentially would be a head coach first from John Cooper's staff, Halpern, I feel like, has interviewed for a couple of opportunities there.
Yeah.
Now, Lalonde obviously, had that opportunity and took it and was let go. But I think Halpern, you've read more about him getting opportunities to interview, and I think he would most likely be the next guy in line who a team maybe would take a flyer on because of his pedigree as a player, and he's been successful in the position he's been in with the Lightning.
What he has working against him, and I actually don't even know if this does work against him. Ultimately, if he gets hired somewhere, it will not have worked against him. But he has no head coaching experience. He has always been an assistant coach. Unlike, Darche Lalonde was a head coach at the AHL level. Jeff Blashill, head coach not only at the AHL level, at the NHL level. What is going for Halpern is he has been the guy to oversee a Lightning power play that has been fantastic.
Right.
Even, without Steven Stamkos, they had a very, very good year, even though it was more fluid in terms of the personnel. I think they were looking up until the very end for a system and a setup, really, that would work best. But the proof is in the numbers, and that was basically Halpern's baby. So we talked about kind of the combined brain trust of Zettler and Blashill for the penalty kill. The power play is Halpern's, and he's had great success working with that. He has also been a great one-on-one coach. And I mean, you can see this if you ever have the opportunity to watch a Lightning practice, because he was a very, very good face-off guy as a player. And, you know, he has helped, I think, a lot of the Lightning centermen improve at face-offs. In addition to just kind of the one-on-one drills. Usually at the end of practice, Halpern is the one out there working on individual skills with players who want to stay out there late, or in the case of a game day, the scratch players. So, you know, all of that is working in his favor. But I think if he gets the hire, it's going to be an NHL team is like, this is a smart guy. He knows the game, and look what he's done with the Lightning's power play. Yeah, he's had the weapons, but just because you have the weapons doesn't mean that it's going to translate. I mean, we talked much about this power play 2 years ago. The Penguins had a bunch of Hall of Famers on their power play, and the power play couldn't get out of its own way. So just because you have talent on the power play doesn't mean the power play is going to be good. Lightning's power play has been phenomenal during the entire time that Halpern has kind of had the keys to that car. So
that happened within the last week, and then Mathieu Darche, who
congratulations to him.
This one was interesting because he's now the general manager of the Islanders, and by all accounts, I think we've actually one of the few personnel from the Lightning we've had on the show at some point. It wasn't frequent. I remember speaking to him one or two times.
He's very here's a $5 SAT word, but he's very gregarious. Like he loves to chat. That. He loves to talk. He's great on the air. You know,
he is,
and he's got like a very positive attitude, personality. He's just a fun guy to chat with. He's got a great sense of humor.
So he does.
Which is independent from his qualifications to be GM. He's also extremely qualified to be the general manager of an NHL team.
He is. And, you know, he was a guy that, you know, I didn't realize this, that was on the short list for the Penguins when they were looking for a GM. And they end up going with, you know, Kyle Dubas. But, you know, Darche, I feel like, was somebody who, over the last couple of years especially, a lot of teams were looking at him. So this shouldn't be a surprise. Another real smart guy. I think he understands the financial aspect of things, too. I think that's how he got his start, was basically looking at these things and how you can manage the cap and use it to your advantage and work with it. We know the Lightning at times this year, they were up against the cap. You know, somebody asked about resting players at the end of the year like the Panthers did, and we said, look, they just couldn't do it. They were up against the cap, and there were reasons why the Panthers could and the Lightning couldn't. But a smart guy, and I think it speaks to where leagues are going, where teams are going, where, yes, you do need to be able to manage. You do need to be able to identify players. That is still the foundation of building teams. But there is this huge, over here, partner, analytical component to what they do, maybe to get to that conclusion. A little bit more, maybe a lot more than it was 10 years ago. And I feel like Darche probably has a very good grasp on all of that. And it's the reason why, in part, he was hired for the Islanders job.
And so, like what I just said about Jeff Halpern, we can say in this instance about Darche, like Mathieu has never been a GM before. Now it's a little different. You can be GM of a minor league team, but you're basically under the umbrella of the NHL team. And I guess it's possible Darche at one point oversaw Syracuse on some level, but I think that's been more Stacey Roost. But here's the part that I actually read Arthur Staples' article. Arthur covers the Islanders, and he had a pretty in-depth article when Darche got hired. And I kind of knew this just hearing about it, but Arthur had it in his article. Julian gave Mathieu Darche a lot of responsibility. So it wasn't like he was the assistant and kind of like put a bow on what Julian was building. Like Darche did negotiations with agents. Darche put together contracts. Like Darche did a lot of the work that is going to be required of the general manager. I think the Islanders understood that in some ways, like he really has been an apprentice more than an assistant, if that makes sense, like the distinction there. So he's a smart guy. He's got, I mean, to have a good personality is not required of being a good general manager, but being able to talk to people, I think, is not a bad thing. And in many ways, he's done a lot of the work that is going to be required of a general manager, even though he was an assistant general manager to Julian. So that's really a credit to Julian, that Julian trusted him to be able to take this on. I also didn't realize that Julian signed Mathieu Darche to his first NHL contract.
Interesting.
Because Julian
was in Montreal?
Julian was in Montreal.
Yeah.
So, again, that was after he left the Lightning, and Julian was on GM of the Canadiens. It might have been a similar situation for Julian, where he was given a lot of rope.
Yeah.
Darche would have probably signed a two-way contract.
Yeah.
But, although that doesn't make sense because he was with the Lightning prior to that. So, I must have read that wrong. But whatever the case, Julian did sign Darche. Right? Julian did sign Darche to a contract. So, they had a relationship as kind of somebody on management, on the team side, and then the player who signed the contract, and they've been close through the years. And when Julian became the GM in 2019, one of the first things he did was bring Mathieu Darche on. Took a couple of years before he became assistant GM, but yeah, it didn't take long.
What's interesting about the managing style of Julian, you mentioned right there, he gave Mathieu a lot of responsibilities. I do think that is one of the great balances. If you are somebody in charge of a team, a corporation, you can't be micromanaging. I think if you micromanage, you get into the weeds of so many things. It fails you to do your job ultimately. And so it kind of reinforces probably what we already know about Julian Brees. While he's a really smart guy, makes good decisions, but I think part of that is you hire the right person, and then you let them run with it.
Yeah.
You obviously give your input, and you give them some tips. But if you hire the right person, you don't have to micromanage. And I think Darche is probably a really good example of that. Took on a lot of responsibilities, but it's because Julian trusted him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably something you can take in any profession. You got to trust the people that work for you. And if you don't, and you're micromanaging, you probably hired the wrong person. And that's just something that always sticks with me. But it's good to see, I think, the way Julian handled that situation. That's some news and notes, at least.
Yeah.
In the front
So the
office.
Lightning are going to be in the market for an assistant coach, assuming that they add another, which would seem to be logical.
Yeah.
And we'll see who fills the assistant GM position.
Yep. I'm sure they have candidates.
For the Lightning.
I'm sure they're interviewing people as we speak. And you kind of go from there.
No news on the player front, though, for the Lightning.
No.
In terms of any, pending free agents that they've signed at this point.
Yeah. So we'll obviously keep you up to date when that happens. There are a couple of series going on at the same time. Do you want to get into Edmonton, Dallas? Because they played last night, and then we'll kick back and end with Carolina and Florida.
Well, you know what? Let me start with.
Where do you want to go?
I know we spent a lot of time on Florida last week. We don't need to spend as much time. In fact, we can't spend as much time on Florida this week.
Our audience
we've already been on for 20 plus minutes. So the Panthers had 2 games at the beginning of the Toronto series where they weren't really themselves. One game they were worse than the other. And then they had a little bit of a shaky start as they were transitioning at the beginning of Game 3 of the Toronto series. So they gave up 2 early goals in Game 3 of the Toronto series before they kind of got their game together. After that, they gave up an early second period power play goal. So let's start at that point.
Yep.
Couple minutes into the second period of Game 3 of their second round series. They've just given up a third goal. They are down 3-1. They are down 2-0 in that series. They pressed on the gas, and Toronto was like, uncle. Florida just overwhelmed Toronto for the rest of that second period, scored 2 quick goals, tied it, took the lead. They were up going into the third. Toronto popped in a goal to tie it, and then Florida won in overtime. It was a close game. Toronto could have won that game. They didn't. From the point that the Panthers gave up that third goal, for the rest of that game and for every game since, they've either held the other team to 1 goal, no goals, by 1 goal I mean with Bobrovsky in the net, or there was the one game, Game 6, where they gave up a second goal late on an odd man because they were pressing. What I'm saying basically is like the Panthers have been defensively almost as close to perfect since Game 3 of the Toronto series as you can be, and I'm even including the second half of Game 3. Look at the goals against.
Yeah,
there was a 0 in there, but it's not like they've been able to shut out the opponent in every game. But in a couple of these, like the other team scored 1. It was pretty late in the game. I stand corrected. Carolina scored 2 in one of the games that they lost earlier in the series. But I mean, you're looking at 2 goals allowed or 1 goal allowed, and that's it. And that is how you win championships. So what I said last week, and I still believe this to be true, starting with Game 3 of the Toronto series, the Panthers have lost a total of 2 games. Game 6 against Toronto and Game 4 against Carolina. In both those games, what the other team was able to do was match what Florida does defensively. And I am even more convinced today than I was last week when I said this. That is the only way another team is going to beat the Panthers this year. It's the only way. Because the Panthers are not going to deviate. They're not going to have 2 games like they had at the beginning of the Toronto series. They are too close now. They know the formula. They are doing it regularly. They are like a machine. So it is a very, very big ask. But if the other team can defend at the level that the Panthers are defending and maintain it, now you have a push. And it's going to come down to a play, which is basically what happened in the 2 games that they lost, 1 to Toronto and 1 to Carolina. Mathieu scores a goal early in the third to break a 0-0 tie. And Stankoven, who's having a really good playoff for Carolina, scored in the second period. But that was a 1-0 game, Game 4, Carolina, Florida. And Carolina scored a couple empty netters, so the final was 3-0. But it was a 1-0 game. That's what it's going to take. And you might say, like, well, the other team just needs to do it. It's hard to do. That's why what the Panthers are doing is so remarkable. Toronto was able to do it for Game 6.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we have our formula. What happened in Game 7? They weren't able to do it, right? And as we said last week, when the other team isn't doing it, the Panthers are surgical in their execution and making the other team pay for a mistake. So it's almost like you have to reach this incredibly high level and keep it. And that is so hard to do. But the Panthers are doing it. That's why I think in some ways they've been more impressive in this playoff year than they were last year. And again, we can get into Dallas Edmonton, but I'm just throwing that out there again. Nothing I have seen since last week has forced me to change my opinion. And look, the odds are very much against Carolina. They're going to need to play basically 3 more games like they did in Game 4. And even if they play that way, there's no guarantee that they are going to get the play to give them the lead and win the game.
What was that stat?
That is the only, I think that is the only way that a team is going to knock off the Panthers, because the Panthers are they're not giving up anything. Nothing. And when they have the rare breakdown, Bobrovsky's making a save.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. You know, you wonder, usually when you're going for the second of the back-to-back there for championships. Usually that first run, everything's clicking. The second one, you're winning it differently because you're tired or just, guys leave, and you're doing it differently. I mean, I feel like this in some ways has been more impressive. The way they're doing it, I know they haven't won anything, but the way they're methodically just going at the opponents here and just like, wash, rinse, repeat. Try and beat us.
Last year, they had some games in their playoff run where they gave up like 4 or 5 goals.
Yeah.
They lost 8-0. And I mean, that was
right.
Oilers were facing elimination. That was Game 4. I mean, that was a throw in the garbage sort of game. But they're just not having games like that this year, other than Game 1 against Toronto. I thought that was their mulligan.
Yeah.
And it ended up not hurting them. But they have been playing at championship
They've been like a
level.
Machine.
Yeah.
And what's the stat with Carolina?
Well, they ended the streak, right?
How many
they had
losses in a row?
Yeah, because they got swept 3 straight conference
Pittsburgh with
finals, And then they lost the first 3 of this series.
I mean, that's
But I mean, like in this series, they didn't have the lead until Stankoven scored in game 4. So I'll say this because I watched game 3. Carolina through 2 periods did what I said teams need to do, which is they basically matched Florida defensively. It was a 1-1 going into the third. But then what happened? Boquist, who was in the lineup because Reinhart got hurt, slices his way in front. It's a horrific breakdown, and he scores. And it was like the floodgates open. So, I mean, what's the mark of a strong team mentally in this instance? You know, Carolina, I think, is strong mentally, but in this particular instance, in this particular moment, they weren't. Because they had the one breakdown, then they had another breakdown, then another breakdown. I mean, Florida scored 5 goals.
Yeah.
A 1-1 game became 6-1.
That's a collapse.
It's crazy.
That's a collapse. They also haven't gotten production.
And, I mean, there were glorious chances, too. Right. It wasn't just that, you know, Florida just amped up their – they were all Christmas presents.
Yes.
And Panthers were like, thank you. Thank you very much.
They also have
2-1, 3-1, 4-1, 5-1.
Yeah. And this is credit to the Panthers, I think, but also maybe the one bugaboo at times with Carolina. They haven't gotten their star players going as much in this series. They just haven't. I mean, Aho, I don't think, has had the impact he's wanted to have.
But the way Florida's defending, Greg, it's going to be hard for tie-in players to have the sort of games that you're like, whoa, they need to lead the way. Like, when a team is D'ing up like Florida is, that is very, very hard to do.
That is 100% true, and we've said it before, defense wins championships all the time. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean your star players can't push back a little bit. You know, I mean, they're just not doing that. Like, I'm not saying they're going to win the series, but, like, show some resistance here. Put some pressure on Florida to a degree. The Lightning had at times, you know, there weren't many of those moments, but, you know, there was a little bit of pushback. So, look, as long as you have your best players, they got to do something. I mean, you're going to have to rely on them to a degree to pull you out of this. And you're right. I mean, look, does anybody think the Panthers are going to let this lead slip away? Probably not with the way they're playing. It's just, to your point, it's been more impressive what they've been able to do. It's just an observation. They're making Carolina and their best players look pretty ordinary. And that's a sign of a really good defensive team.
But that's what they did to Toronto in the games where Toronto didn't play very well after the first couple. They did that to Matthews and Marner and Nylander and Tavares, and they certainly did it to the Lightning as well.
They did, for sure. You know what's interesting? Let's go over to the series.
I just want to mention one other guy in Game 4, because you're talking about like stars. Mm-hmm. He had a monster game for Carolina. Monster game, Slavin. So it wasn't that he was like generating chances. He was so good defensively. So if you were going to match what Florida is doing defensively, who is the big responsibility going to land on? You're probably your best defensive player. Now, Slavin can't play the whole game, but he was fantastic. He denied so many potential moments for Carolina. In other words, Florida was going to get a chance, and you're like, for Carolina, and there's Slavin to save the day. He played really, really well in the Four Nations, and people were like, oh, my gosh, Jacob Slavin. And we're like, yeah, this guy is a stud. He is a McDonough-type stud in that he's not going to score 80 points. But I thought he was as big a key as anyone in Carolina to how they were able to win that game. And I just happened to see in today's morning skate, this is a quote from Spencer Carberry, the Washington head coach, after their series ended against Carolina, about Slavin. Quote, how he's not in the Norris Trophy conversation every year, it doesn't seem right. The guys that are there are tremendous players in their own right, but he's one heck of a player. This is the same thing that we've talked about, mostly about McDonough, but I think Slavin falls into the same category. So,
I think
high marks to him. I'm not sure that he can single-handedly like just erase chance after chance after chance for 3 more games, but he had a terrific game in an elimination game for Carolina, and I thought he was maybe the biggest reason why they are now playing a 5th game tonight.
He's a heck of a player, and I think, he's standing out for sure in that series. As we pivot to what we're seeing over in the West, Edmonton and Dallas, I think a lot of people were surprised maybe how this is going and maybe how it's playing out, more importantly from Dallas's perspective, because they are having some problems scoring. Pierre LeBrun had an article today, partner in The Athletic, about where basically has the scoring gone for Dallas. That was really one of the keys heading into the series. And we keep going back to Jack Michaels and his take earlier in the year about Edmonton. And it was funny, off of a quote in that article, it feels like the depth of Edmonton is really being a factor, and that for Dallas, their star players or their scoring in general has really dried up. And I'm not sure we anticipated that in this series. Edmonton's getting really good goaltending as well. That's factored in. I think Edmonton's power play maybe is starting to find some rhythm, so that's been a little bit of a difference. But I think if you were to say before that series started that Dallas was going to be the team that was going to struggle to create offensively consistently, I think you would have said, man, what's going on here? Are there some injuries to Dallas? And it really hasn't played out that way, and credit to Edmonton for capitalizing on that and maybe D'ing up to an extent and getting the goaltending that we maybe questioned a little bit heading into these postseason games.
Yeah, Stuart Skinner has been good.
Yeah,
in the series. He's outplayed Ottinger, which I think would be a surprise if you had asked me anyway before the series began. So I have to do a full-blown mea culpa on Edmonton because I was not impressed with them late in the regular season. I was not impressed with them at the beginning of the LA series, really even through the LA series. I'm like, well, the way they are playing is not sustainable. I mean, their penalty kill, Greg, I checked it this morning. It's still at like under 70%. It's basically 66%. So they're allowing one power play goal in every 3 opportunities that the other team is getting on the power play. And if you were to ask me, like, can you win the Stanley Cup with a penalty kill under 70%? It is going to be very, very hard to do. I would say it's impossible to do. So their penalty kill it's improved from the first round. It was horrifically bad against LA. And the reason they were able to get through that series was they outscored their problems. So against a really good defensive team, LA, Edmonton found a way to rally to win 4 straight after they lost the first 2 and gave up a boatload of goals really throughout the series, other than Game 5. I think Game 5 they allowed 1, but that was the outlier game. They go into the Vegas series and they fall behind 2-0 early in Game 1, and they have another rally, and they're still giving up power play goals. But at some point during the Vegas series, their defensive standard got higher, and it is now super high. Like, I did watch the game last night. Their third period was clinical, and they won 4-1. They had 2 empty netters. So it was 2-1 going into the third. And this is a game in which Dallas had a lot of pressure early in the game and created a fair number of scoring chances. But when it was like the rubber meets the road, I mean, we talk about this all the time. You have a 1-goal lead going into the third period of a playoff game. Can you lock it down? Edmonton locked it down. Dallas could not get anything going. And I think that's less about Dallas and more about Edmonton. They were just buttoned up. They were like, pucks out, to the red line, in, to the red line, in. I think third period shots finished 13-4, Edmonton. Dallas is down 2-1 in the series. They're down 2-1 in Game 4 going into the third period. They need a result. They need a goal. 4 shots. So the way Edmonton is defending right now, I don't think it's quite at Florida level, but that was super impressive, what I saw from them last night. Now, they also had a second period in Game 3 where they got outshot like 21-6, where Dallas put on a lot of pressure, but they only got 1 goal out of it. So whether it's Skinner, whether they're being defensively sound, even though they're getting outplayed at points, I don't think they've been outplayed in the series, but that 1 second period in Game 3, the first period last night in Game 4. Dallas had the run of play. It's what you often say. When you have momentum, what are you doing with it? Dallas didn't do enough with it in either of those instances. And Edmonton deserves to be up 3-1. If not for Edmonton has had they've had 3 subpar periods. The third period of Game 1, the second period of Game 3, and the first period of Game 4. In the latter 2, I say subpar because the other team pressed a lot. But they hung in there defensively and they got some saves. The first one, they gave up 3 power play goals in 6 minutes and blew a 3-1 lead and gave up 5 in the period. That one really, really hurt, but that's the only one that has really hurt them of their lapses. And again, it was the penalty kill. They gave up the 3 power play goals. They gave up a power play goal again last night. But the penalty kill has been offset by really good 5-on-5 play. And because they're so good offensively and their power play has been good, they've been able, when they've given up some power play goals, to find a way to overcome that. That is very, very rare, and I'm not sure if they see the Panthers in the final that's going to work. They're going to need to figure out their penalty kill and make it even better, even though it's been marginally better.
Can we get Jack on?
Well, he
may come on with us.
Yeah, he may come on with us. He's going to be a busy man if the Oilers win one of the next 3.
We need to run that soundbite.
But they have been the better team in this series.
Yeah,
which I think would be surprising to a lot of people. And based on how they looked when the Lightning saw them in late February, this is before they added Trent Frederick. Like, they made some moves at the deadline, but Nugent Hopkins looked like a shell of himself. Hyman looks slow. Janmark looks slow. Corey Perry looks slow. I mean, Corey Perry has never been fleet of foot, but he just turned 40 and he looked it late in the season, regular season. And you're right. It hasn't only been Draisaitl and McDavid and Evan Bouchard in these later games. They've gotten depth scoring. They've gotten goals from Henrique. Hyman has had a great playoff. Got hurt last night. Looks like it's not going to be a short-term thing. Shoulder. Like Marchment. He actually pulled up on a hit, so Marchment didn't make full body contact, but caught him in the shoulder, and Hyman skated off with his...
That's a big loss.
Based on how he's playing.
Yeah,
but, Corey Perry's had a good playoff as well. And Nugent Hopkins, I think, does he have 9? I think he has 9 assists through the first 4 games of this series. So he has been really impactful and really elevated his play from what we saw from him and the Oilers in the regular season. But I'm going to circle back to this one point. So Edmonton's penalty kill has not been great in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. But they've been able to find ways to overcome it. In this series in particular, though, it's been the Dallas penalty kill that has been a big problem. I mean, last night, it was a 2-1 game going into the third. The Stars were through 2 periods. The Stars were 1 for 4 in the power play. The Oilers were 2 for 2. You got to kill one of those penalties if you're Dallas, and preferably both. Going 0 for 2 in the penalty kill in a low-scoring game against a team that has found its defensive game is going to sink you like an anchor, and that's what happened. That's why Why did Dallas lose the game last night? 0 for 2 in the penalty kill in the first 40 minutes. That's why. They were playing catch-up. And when they scored to tie the game and won, they took a penalty in the next shift.
Yeah.
And the Oilers got the lead back. So I'm not veering from my my take, which is you need to be killing penalties to win in the playoffs. It has not hurt Edmonton yet, and in some ways the other team's penalty kill has been worse than theirs in this series. And the Kings' penalty kill was not any great shakes either, which helped Edmonton as well in the first round.
A couple of other observations there. By the way, Corey Perry, 9 points through 15 playoff games. He's a +4.
Yeah.
That is some high-level hockey. I mean, he is playing.
He's going to where he goes. He goes to the front of the net, and the Oilers have enough skilled players. They can get pucks to him for redirections.
How many Stanley Cup Finals has that guy been to over the last decade? I mean, it's been it's been pretty
Dallas
incredible,
in
right?
20, Montreal in 21, the Lightning in 22.
Yeah.
Last year with Edmonton. So that's 4 in 6 years.
That's pretty incredible run. I mean, it's not a Pat Maroon.
No.
But it's still pretty good. A guy who was his finding production. I guess with Hyman being banged up, I was reading up on it. I did not realize this. I guess Jeff Skinner potentially would be the next man up, but he's been a healthy scratch.
Yeah,
when you think about it again, he just hasn't been able to.
He didn't really do enough for Edmonton. You know, a guy who has really played well for them, kind of coming out of nowhere, is Kapanen.
Kasperi Kapanen.
Seriously,
I know.
Like he scored some big goals for them.
I agree with you.
Or he scored some goals, and some of them have been big goals. He had an empty netter last night. I think he had an overtime winner earlier in the playoffs. But
he can fly. He can skate.
But he has helped pull on the rope.
Yeah.
Like, you don't think of Kasperi Kapanen as this shut-down defensive player.
No.
But when you're playing on a system, you're playing on a team that is rolling in its system.
Yeah.
And everyone is D'ing up really, really well, and everyone's in sync. Like, you can slot a guy like that in there, and he fits right in.
So the other thing that I took from this game, and maybe from the series, and you know, to a degree we can bring it back to the Lightning, because we heard a lot of criticism about it when the Lightning were eliminated in the first round, is that they had problems getting the puck on net. Peter DeBoer has mentioned that. Not only that, but playing with the lead. I don't think they've had a lead in this series, or if they had it other than game one. Yeah, I mean, but they've struggled to hit the net.
Mm-hmm.
And so it goes back to, there's a certain level of defense you're going against in the playoffs that makes it extremely hard to get the puck through. I mean, everybody is blocking shots. Everybody is tightening things up. But it's not just the Lightning problem. There are teams who are trying to generate offense, who are struggling, that feel like they're getting to their game. Like DeBoer said yesterday, we've liked a lot of things we've done in this series, particularly the first period, but we just didn't convert. Mm-hmm. And instead of us having a 2-0 lead, we're down 1-0. And we've talked about that before. Like, when you have that momentum, what do you do with it? But they're having some of the same issues the Lightning were having maybe in that first round, is that they're not generating enough shots on net, and they're getting a lot of shots blocked. And that's got to be incredibly frustrating for a team who is used to generating offense. The other thing it was saying in the article with Pierre LeBrun is that the Stars are a really good transition team. They get a lot of chances up to the series where they are able to create with speed coming into the neutral zone, into the offensive zone, on-man rushes, or they had time to make a move. And in this series, it's not happening. They're really having to work for it, and it's caused them problems for whatever reason. I mean, you would think a team that skilled would be able to figure that out, but could they just be running into a team who is putting it together at the right time as well? And it's making it extremely difficult for the Stars' offense to get going. And let's face it, that is the Stars' bread and butter. If their depth scoring, if their scoring in general is going to dry up, that series becomes very even now. And in this instance, it's tilted to the Edmonton side because of their star players and collectively what they've been able to do offensively in this series. So I thought it was an interesting observation from DeBoer talking about, I liked the effort, especially last night. I liked a lot of things we did. We're just not generating enough shots on net. Yeah. Man, I felt like we heard a lot of that, didn't we, with the Lightning and the Panthers in that first round. You know, we talked about Victor Hedman winding up with his big slap shot.
Right.
Just get it on net. And I understand it's easier said than done, but the Lightning aren't the only team, I think, at times that have struggled with that in these playoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like the Stars have had periods where they've had a ton of possession every period. Right. But when they've had lots of possession, they've not gotten a lot out of it. I'm thinking about the two periods that I mentioned, the second period in Game 3 and the first period last night. And some of that is they're not finishing. Some of it is maybe the Oilers are not making it easy on them to finish, like they're getting in the shooting lanes. But series is not over yet.
No, it's not.
Dallas is going to have to win a road game. So it was less pronounced in the Colorado series because the road team had some success early in that series. But, you know, the Stars, I think, are now, 2-6 on the road in the playoffs?
I think you're right, yeah.
So their game has not been as good on the road as it has been at home. Having said that, I thought they were outplayed in both the games in Dallas at the beginning of the series. So,
yep.
You know, they're going to need to change the narrative. And to me, it goes back to defending. Like, had their penalty kill been able to take care of business last night, maybe they win the game 1-0.
I think that's fair.
You know, maybe it's 1-1, and they're not chasing, right?
Yep.
So, again, when a team is leading and they're playing well defensively and they get a lead, it becomes very difficult to break them down.
Yeah.
You really need kind of almost like them to have a brain cramp or a bounce goes your way. The dynamic changes, and we've seen this with the Panthers, as good as they've been defensively, they're more likely to give up something when they are down. And it's kind of sort of late in the game, by kind of sort of, let's say the third period. And they have to press to try and get a goal. That's what happens. If you press to try and get a goal, you're going to leave yourself open potentially to a counterattack. The Oilers have been in the driver's seat through much of the series in terms of the scoreboard. So I think it would behoove Dallas in Game 5 to get a lead. Maybe things start opening up for them.
Yeah.
And then they're not trying to like shoot around guys, right? They get the 2-on-1.
I think that's fair in that assessment. I'm curious, and we'll get to a couple of questions, and maybe you've already answered this. Has there anything that's surprised you? You know, our convictions heading into the playoffs, certain things that you need, whether it's defense, whether it's goaltending, whether it's star players. Has anything changed in these playoffs for you or surprised you, or do you feel like those same pillars of key moments that you need to have to win still present? Is there anything that's kind of
I just said
an outlier?
Edmonton has surprised me because they've given up a lot of goals on the penalty kill.
Right.
But here they are, one win away from going back to the Stanley Cup final. Now, they've been better in this series defensively and even the end of the Vegas series. So that part jives. But I guess what has surprised me is the Oilers have gone from an extremely subpar defensive team at the beginning of the playoffs to a really, really solid defensive team
like that
more recently.
Yeah, right.
I mean, did it happen like snap of the fingers? Was it kind of a work in progress? Hard to know. It kind of happened in the Vegas series, though, as they got better. The other thing that has surprised me is twofold about the Panthers. First of all, and I've mentioned this many times to the people who are, regular viewers / listeners to the show, that they got to this high level right off the bat. I mean, they had a step back at the beginning of the Toronto series, but other than that, they've been like Stanley Cup Zilla, as I said last week. Like, they've just been a behemoth and very difficult for the other team to deal with. So I think I was surprised that they were able to get to that level right off the bat. And then the level that they are at is so exceedingly high, Greg. I mean, they're making top opponents look ordinary. That is so hard to do. It's hard to do ever, but they're doing it like over long stretches of time.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little surprising to me. I'm not surprised that the Panthers are in position to go back-to-back. I mean, they have a really good team, and this has been their goal, and they know how to win in the playoffs. But as I said earlier in the show, I think they're actually playing better defensively, specifically, in this year's playoff than they did last year. Like, Bobrovsky's had a great playoff in terms of his numbers, but, I mean, if the Panthers win the Stanley Cup, I don't think Bobrovsky should win the Conn Smythe. I don't know who should win the Conn Smythe, but it's not like he has had to, like, bail them out time and time again. The team in front of him has been championship level.
Yeah.
He's been very, very good, with the odd exception. But every goalie's going to give up an iffy goal now and then. He's been quite good, but has he been that like, is he the linchpin to what the Panthers are doing? No, I don't think so. I think he's been part of it.
Yeah.
So
apparently Brad Marchand eating blizzards in between.
Well, that third line with Marchand, Lundell, and Luostarinen, they have been a huge difference-making line for the Panthers in this playoff year. And, now, like we talked about Tkachuk, and maybe took him around to kind of get back to Tkachuk level.
Yeah.
Even though he was effective in the Lightning series. Tkachuk, Bennett, Verhaeghe, that has been a handful for Carolina.
Been a good
as
line.
Well.
Evan Rodriguez has also been very good. I know we've liked him before. He's somebody that's added some skill.
Yep.
For sure. When you start talking about depth and all of that. So I nothing is surprising. Maybe to your point, to put a bow on this conversation, the way Edmonton has been able to find a different gear on how to win games has been a little bit surprising. But sometimes that does happen when you are in the playoffs. Jim does say congratulations to Jeff Blashill on his head coach position with the Blackhawks. Any candidates to replace him on the Lightning staff? Possibly a return of Derek Lalonde.
I have no idea how they determine who would be the right candidate. But the coaching circle is a pretty tight one, and they may pluck somebody from the minors. It's possible. I don't know. We'll find out when we find out, Jim.
Was Derek Lalonde... Help me with my memory. I believe, didn't he have some interesting words about Andrei Vasilevsky in that?
He went on national TV and maybe
I'm just
pulled back
this.
the curtain more than the Lightning would have liked. But I don't know how much that bothered.
So I'm not. I have no inside sources on that. I'm just going to say if that was me, I'd be like, all right, you know what? I don't know. I don't know if you can be on my roster. I mean, you go there. Come on, Derek. That doesn't mean he's not a good coach. He may still get that opportunity.
Well, we know from our interactions with Derek Lalonde, like he tends to speak his mind, right?
We love it.
Yeah.
We love it. We always ask athletes and coaches to say something, and then a lot of times when they do say something, it offends somebody. But I'm okay with it. I'm just saying from an organizational perspective, is that something you can get over, or hey, if he's the best man for the job, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So I don't know. To me, that would be an interesting situation. Sean says, and this was from 5 days ago, partner, so keep that in mind. Nobody wants to watch the Panthers or Kane-style hockey. Officiating the playoffs has to be completely changed to incentivize their styles of play if the NHL wants to go anywhere. Interesting.
Yeah, see, I think he's implying that because the Panthers push the envelope and they get away with
they do
with a lot.
They do.
I think the Canes have brought their big boy pants essentially into the series, and they have met what the Panthers have thrown at them physically. They've tried to anyway. I mentioned early in the series they were bumping Bobrovsky. They've laid some big hits on some Panther players. But I actually like this criticism of like Carolina plays boring style of hockey, which I've seen. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Like, I love their style of play. I love the way Brind'Amour has them play. That's like a basketball team that does a full court press 48 minutes. I mean, yeah, like they don't have McDavid on their team. So they kind of score goals in a little bit more of a meat and potatoes type of way. But I love the way the Carolina Hurricanes play. When you're talking about up ice pressure and in your face, it's the opposite of a trap. So if you think the trap is boring, and a lot of people back in the 90s complained about the trap in the early 2000s, I don't see how you can criticize the Hurricanes for playing quote-unquote boring hockey. Maybe that's not what Sean was referring to. The Panthers also have a very aggressive forecheck, but I'm not sure. They don't play quite the same way as Carolina. Carolina uses that man-to-man approach without the puck. And Florida isn't quite that way. But look, if you're a fan of a team that's winning, you're down with any style, right? I mean, fans of the Hurricanes, fans of the Panthers don't mind the way that they play. I think it's just if you have no dog in the hunt, and you have no dog in the hunt, I mean, you're not rooting against a team and you're just sitting to watch. I mean, it may come down to personal preference. Then you probably are like, I want to see the top players. Maybe I want to see McDavid make a dazzling rush move, but there's no guarantee that those teams with those players are going to be standing at the end. Now, McDavid and the Oilers have gone deep here a couple of years in a row, but think of all the top-end players that went out early in the playoffs or missed the playoffs.
Sure. I've heard just the complaints. We can end on this. The season's too long, and playoff hockey shouldn't be played in the summer. Figure that out, and maybe that might be a little bit more impactful for people watching the game than having these
Yeah.
superficial tournaments in the middle of the season to draw
there's
interest.
that. But I mean, you're not gonna take away any gate receipts. So
No,
the
you're not.
playoffs are big
You're not.
money
It is what it is.
making deals for the teams that have the games.
That part is true.
And you want your 41 home games. So I don't think the season is getting short. And maybe you started a little earlier. Maybe you
Could you
whittle
do that?
away some of the preseason games.
Could we
I
do
mean,
that?
The idea always was that, well, it would have to be collectively bargained, I think, if you were going to really start it early, because that would be a shorter off season for the players, particularly for the players and the teams that go deep.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess it's possible you could shorten preseason.
Could you go 2 or 3 games in the preseason?
But I mean, how much
Would
are
that
you
help?
really like? Preseason is training camp and preseason. It's basically like 2.5 weeks.
Right. It's not that long.
Like the preseason is 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So if you were to whittle away a couple of games, how much time are you really adding? I'm not sure. It used to be that the idea was you didn't want to like overlap too much with the NFL and college football. But if the point is not to be playing into the summer, then you kind of have to push it up.
You're always going to be competing against something.
Yeah. And
I mean,
the Four
that's just where we
Nations,
are.
so like the Four Nations and then next year the Olympics, we can kind of put a bow on this and then we'll talk next week. So the idea that you're bringing in new fans who are then going to watch NHL hockey after watching the Four Nations or the Olympics, I'm not sure that there is that. I mean, particularly because the NHL tends to be a regional interest sport. Like if your team is in it, you really pay attention. If your team isn't in it, you kind of maybe pay a little bit of attention or not at all. You're like, my team's out of it. There's no question, though, that those tournaments did bring eyeballs onto them, whether it's the Olympics, assuming the Olympics aren't being like you need it live. And if it's live, hopefully it's not 3:00 in the morning. Right. But the Four Nations was in the Eastern time zone. It was prime time. It was great hockey. It was great theater. And a lot of people watched. And I think the NHL likes that. So I don't think these tournaments are going anywhere. And the players like it too. But you're right.
Yeah,
it's
I
not
agree.
going to do anything to shorten the
No,
season to the point that we're
probably
not
not.
playing into mid-June.
Yeah. I don't know how you fix that, honestly, without reducing the season.
I think we're looking at next Tuesday, by the way, because I have that Hall of Fame event, the Sports Club of
Tuesday
Tampa
it
Bay
is.
Hall of Fame event on Wednesday. So we're gonna go Tuesday.
Tuesday it is. And we will be
We
talking
probably will
hockey.
be looking at the two teams in the Stanley Cup final at that
You
point.
would think.
If my math is correct. I
yeah.
think that even if they go 7, these two series, it should be just about over. Both of them.
Something to talk about.
They should be
Yeah.
over,
For sure.
both of them.
Partner, congrats again.
Yeah,
on
thank you,
the
Greg.
Hall of Fame. And we will talk to you on Tuesday.
All right, talk to you next
All right.
week.
Dave Mishkin there. Steve Ersnick producing as always. We appreciate him. And everybody who listened as well. I am Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.